clap. So we're here with our second summer session of free-form talk about meditations on the Tarot, having worked our way all the way through to letter 11, the letter of called Force, and this being sort of the center fulcrum point of the meditations on the Tarot. I have this feeling everyone's just been gasping and panting. I felt a growing, everyone has just been so game trying to keep up with this, but I have felt a growing sense of overwhelm growing. And so this is a great time to pause. We decided to pause the whole group and go visit a few themes, specific themes. The theme for this session I decided should be, or wanted to start with, the portion towards the very end of letter 11, where Tomberg goes into the observation of the 10 commandments. And he uses the 10 commandments as a guideline upon which to hang an entire sort of a credo about, I would say, the path, the purpose and philosophy of the Hermeticist. And it's very interesting because I also compared it to Mebes, and I found Mebes' correlation of the same thing. He has the 10 commandments. So they're also placed in a little bit more metaphysical language, but I thought it might be helpful to compare these two. Not that we're going to get too much out of that, but it's a place to start. But before I go further, actually, I'll just, when Honey comes back, I'll just start this. So do you have that portion? It's on our book, page 296.
I'm here and I'm listening,
okay.
But I have to do something else. So I'm right here with you.
Okay, great. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that you're there. But while you're there, Honey, one more thing. Do you guys have something that is pressing that you would like to bring up in this session?
Eventually, yeah.
Eventually, yeah.
Eventually, yeah. Okay. So let me start with this. So the essential conditions upon which any spiritual tradition must adhere. That's the foundation of this. And in fact, Mebes says a similar thing. He calls it the foundation of all religions. And of course, this is very important to those who are pursuing the mystical path, because it allows us to understand what's the unifying metaphysics, what's the unifying guidelines that all mystics from all traditions understand. And that's why I love the Hermetic path, because it becomes this more universal. It becomes a more universal understanding for us. So he says, it must be founded from above. That means that any tradition must be founded on explicit revelation. And this is something I told you that the traditionalists, this is what, there's a whole school is called traditionalism, and it actually springs out of this stream of thought. So the religion, the spiritual school, whatever it is, must be founded from above. And that, so he uses the example of the Benedictine, Dominican, Franciscan, the orders, the holy orders that live within the Christian church, as examples of inspiration that has held them together and that kept them going, even though they have many flaws. There's many problems with all of them. They still have longevity, and that shows, that indicates that there is a revelation from above which initiated it. So initiated the orders. So then it must observe the 10 commandments and be inspired by the ideal of virginity. So of course, the whole letter of virginity, the Force is about the concept of virginity. So I'm not going to go back into that, but let's just unpack the 10 commandments a bit. They're more than, the 10 commandments are more than simply a moral code of daily life. They signify further the hygiene, the method, and the condition of fructification of the spiritual life, including all forms and degrees of practical esotericism. In this sense, they may be formulated as follows. Then he begins. They constitute the 10 foundations, not only for a healthy moral life, but also for all mystical, Gnostic, magical, and Hermetic practice. So should I review these? Do you want to hear me review these, John, or should we go one by one with them?
Okay.
I wonder if I could just say something. I love the way that he interprets the Ten Commandments, and I think that what he is saying is true. I just have got one little question mark, though, and that is, I think that his interpretation of the Ten Commandments don't actually need the Ten Commandments to be true and helpful. Sometimes they do seem to arise pretty closely from what the Ten Commandments are saying, but sometimes they just seem to generalize in a slightly different direction. Community of effort and experience. Does this really come out of honor thy father and mother, which is really to do with looking after your family? I don't say they're opposed to each other.
I absolutely agree. I have got a question mark on almost every one of these. I just plain don't understand them. Like the second one, non-substitution of products of the human mind and those of nature for the reality of the living God. That sounds like power and money to me.
Yeah,
I don't.
So, okay, so I think this might be useful for me to compare this one by one with Mebes' 10 Commandments.
That would be fun.
Because I think I'm going to do this one-on-one. I'll do this the best I can and see what happens. Okay, so when he talks about the first commandment, and by the way, he breaks up, he goes on to explain that the first 4 commandments are grouped as to mean the responsibility of the individual vis-a-vis the one transcendent life. And they involve the work of meditation. It's basically, they all relate to the personal practice of a practitioner of esoteric arts, is that they must have the interior silence. They must have meditation practice. The second 6, the other remaining 6, he says, are directly related to how these work in community, how these commandments are directly related to how we relate to community. So the first 4 are personal, the other 6 are more communal. So let me do one by one. So the first one, he says, surrender to the living God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. And Mebes, his corresponding one is to confess the metaphysical principle of one life. That is a more of a metaphysical, he's putting in metaphysical language. He's taking the word God out of it altogether. To confess the metaphysical principle of one life. I'll go on. Number 2 for Tomberg is non-substitution of products of the human mind or those of nature for the reality of the living God. Thou shalt not make for thyself a graven image or any likeness. And what Mebes says here is number 2 is, do not fractionate this life metaphysically. That is, do not multiply it in mental principles. Do not fractionate this life metaphysically. That is, do not multiply it in mental principles. Number 3, activity in the name of God without making use of his name in order to adorn oneself with it. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And Mebes says, for number 3, do not fractionate it astrally. He's talking about the one life. That's always what he's talking about, the one life, transcendental life. Do not fractionate it astrally. That is, do not apply the mystery of the dynamic cycle in the direction diverging from the usual hierarchical direction. Now, this can seem very abstruse also, but I'm just going to give it to you. See what sips in. Again, do not fractionate it astrally, the one life. That is, do not apply the mystery of the dynamic cycle in the direction diverging from the usual hierarchical direction. So there's implying here that there's a hierarchical structure, that there's an integrity to the hierarchical structure that must be respected. Okay. So that's, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Practice of meditation is number 4. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So Mebes says, do not obscure it, destroying in physical terms the memory of the emanation origin of all life. Do not obscure it, destroying in physical terms the memory of the emanational origin of all life. You could say that what he's also saying to get back to the center of the from which the emanation of the one life, from where it emanates, which would mean doing that through a meditation practice. When you are practicing meditation in silence, you are moving away obscurations. You are trying to prevent in physical terms, the memory being destroyed. You are trying to remember. I think it's the practice of anamnesis. You are trying to remember the one transcendent life and bring it back through your practice, through your individual practice. So that's the first 4. That applies to the individual. Then Tomberg would say we move into the communal commandments. Respect, number 5, is for Tomberg, continuity of effort and experience. Honor thy mother, thy father, and thy mother. So this is Mebes says, respect those who gave you life, including the parents on the physical plane. Boy, he comes right back to earth on that one, doesn't he? He just says it really plainly. Respect those who gave you life, including the parents on the physical plane. That's not obscure at all. Continuity of effort and experience, yes. Tomberg's is much more abstract, but honor thy father and thy mother. So again, we have to unpack that one in particular. That's really kind of difficult. But I like that Mebes just was very straightforward with it. Then the next one, 6, constructive attitude. Thou shalt not kill, which is what the commandment that Tomberg is unpacking. He unpacks it as constructive attitude. And of course, Tomberg goes on to explain these later, but I'm just giving the synopsis. So Mebes says for number 6, pass life yourself chastely and consciously. Pass life yourself chastely and consciously. That is what he calls a constructive attitude. Thou shalt not kill. You must pass through life consciously. If you are conscious and chaste, you will resist killing anything that emanates from the one life. So the next one is 7. Commandment 7 is faithfulness to the alliance. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Faithfulness to the alliance. And Mebes says of this one, do not attempt an individual life on the physical plane. That's interesting. Do not attempt an individual life on the physical plane. This to me gets back to the temptation of the serpent to perpetuate oneself and create oneself immortal on the horizontal axis, to try to create life on your own without accessing the divine emanation of the one life, thinking that you can do that. You can have an individual life on the physical plane that is not connected, that is not tangential to the one life. That's how I interpret that one. But to go back to, thou shalt not commit adultery. So committing adultery would be, I'm just going to, guess that would be the adulteration of mixing up bios and zoe, taking bios and trying to turn that into zoe, or vice versa, taking zoe, trying to turn it into bios. They are two different streams of life, and they have their place, but they should not be adulterated together. So, and those are just my opinions, my footnotes here. Number 8 is, we're almost there, renunciation of the desire to, Tomberg says, thou shalt not steal. And what thou shalt not steal means is you must renounce the desire to accept merit, which is neither the fruit of one's own work nor the gift of grace. Renunciation of the desire to accept merit, which is neither the fruit of one's own work nor the gift of grace. Thou shalt not steal. Mebes puts it this way: do not encroach on property related to the life of an individual in the physical plane. That's much more grounded, isn't it? Do not encroach on property related to the life of an individual in the physical plane. Thou shalt not steal. The last two, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Number 9, which is renunciation of an accusatory role towards others. Tomberg means by this the polemic or hypercritical role that attitudes we have towards others. And for number 9, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Mebes says, do not encroach on the astral plane against what is connected with some individual life, neither passively by lying nor actively with envy. So he puts those two together. Do not encroach on the astral plane against what is connected with some individual life, neither passively by lying nor actively with envy. So the astral plane language, I know that's a little mystifying, but I think you get the basic idea there. So then, and I'll just say what Tomberg says for 10, thou shalt not cover thy neighbor's house. Respectful consideration for the private and personal life of others. So this is so much stuff, but does it become a little clearer when I say that the first 4 are talking about meditation? It's the life of thought within the organism of mysticism, gnosis, and magic. Its fundamental law is meditation, the practice of remembering the Sabbath day to keep it holy. It's sanctified rest. So, and that's where thought is turned inward, turned towards that which is above. I mean, not inward, but towards that which is above. So that's what he says is the role of the first 4 commandments in spiritual practice, and that the other 6 state the fundamental laws of spiritual culture or discipline, serving as basis for the spiritual practice, to which the first 4 commandments relate. This is similar to in yoga practice, there what are called the yamas and the niyamas. the yamas are spiritual practices having to do with purification of the individual consciousness. They are the things which relate to take the beam out of your own eye before you try to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. That you must have done inner work to purify yourself before you can even entertain how to behave as an ethical being in community. The niyamas are the principles that apply. The yamas are the principles that apply to the individual practitioner. The niyamas are how those relate to the spiritual culture in which one is in. So just to tell you, those seem to be, I do see correlations with other schools of spiritual thought. So having said all that, do you want me to explore any particular part?
Well, I see how they fit in with the yoga, yamas and niyamas. I do, but I think my problem with it is that it is the 10 Commandments. And of course, I know they've been translated and translated and translated, but they are very simplistic and very black and white. And I think what Mebes and Tomberg are saying they are gray. It is not exactly black and white. Does that all make sense? And I'm not saying it's wrong or not right. I'm just saying it's different. And so for me, who's lived with the 10 Commandments for, pretty much 80 years now, it's really a big leap.
Exactly.
That's all.
To put it another way, I would say that what most of us have lived with is the 10 Commandments on the most literal level. And we talked about this a while ago, we've talked about this several times, the different levels of interpretation of any scriptural text or any principles. We have the literal level, the moral level, the metaphorical level, and the anagogical level. There are 4 levels, which I do believe is what Tomberg and Mebes are dancing through, the higher levels of interpretation.
I think that's really helpful, Alison, and I agree with that. However, right through the whole of Mead's interpretation is the theme, do not fractionate, do not break in two. Now, there are plenty of places where we should not break in two. And I do think that concentrating on our oneness with God and each other, which of course Jesus did very strongly in St. John's Gospel. I and my Father are one thing. I pray that my followers may be one thing with us, Father, and I. So I mean that is very important. But it's not actually everything that there is to say, because 2 things. First of all, when God decided to create a world which was separate from God's self, he was fractionating. And this fractionating is not something that we can simply get rid of. We can't say, if I say my prayers every day, I'm going to cease to be a created being. I mean, this fractionating is going to continue. And similarly, when Jesus said, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, love can only happen if there is a fractionating. I cannot love myself in the same way as I can love my beloved and be loved by beloved. And this seems to be what Jesus is saying. This is the most important thing. A new commandment I give you. This is what it's all about. I'm going to be killed tomorrow. This is what I'm telling you to hang on to. Now, I'm sure that there is a good fractionating and a bad fractionating, but it's a shame that he doesn't actually make that clear and do a spot of describing, or perhaps he does and he can tell us what it is.
Mebes, I just found this morning. I'm just starting to unpack it. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. And Tomberg does say here, there's no religion without value or that is even intrinsically false or diabolical. But on the other hand, there is no religion higher value than that of love. He says that right here. He says that love is the highest religion. So to me, all of these other commandments emanate from that commandment. They do. They emanate because if one practices loving in every single level of one's being, loving the self and loving others and loving the creation and loving God, if you practice on all these levels, the loving practice, you'll be on the right track because that is in consonance or coherence with the one transcendental life, the one, the Father and I are one. But that is how, but it has to be broken down into granular practices for people. What does that mean to love one's neighbor as oneself? What does it mean to not steal? You know, just to give these become granular practices. Just to give you one example of how this can apply. When I first started practicing yoga, I would be in a posture in a class, and the temptation was to look at my neighbor and see how they were doing the pose, and to compare how I was doing the pose with how they were doing the pose. That is a practice. Okay, so right there and then you have to stop with your own practice and check in and say, why am I comparing myself to this person? That is not right. And that is the principle of stealing, that you're stealing a glance. Literally, when you steal a glance at somebody, you're stealing a glance. You're automatically comparing. You might start envying also. So you're looking and you're envying. What you must do in yoga practice is you must stop that impulse right there and then and say, no, I'm going to turn this back towards my own effort. And I'm not going to compare myself to my neighbor. Ultimately, that is more respectful of my neighbor's transcendent experience of life on their own, because I'm not astrally sending energy and saying, oh, I wish I was like that. Do you understand? That's just one tiny example of the granular practice of these principles. It's so hard to explicate these things. I think it's better to use examples. I really do. There's the principle of, in yoga. So here's another example. In yoga practice, one of the I can't remember if it's a yama or niyama, whatever, is ahimsa. Do not harm. Do no harm. Well, you can sit there and go, okay, well, I can't harm an animal, so I'm not going to eat any meat. All right. And yet you don't hesitate to like berate somebody or knock them down. And you don't really even think about that. You just go, well, I'm trying not to eat animals. I'm trying to do no harm. Well, you have to work, you must work on doing no harm to yourself. Here's an example in yoga practice. This is a great example of ahimsa at work. Again, when a beginner starts, the tendency is for them to want to, they want so hard to, they get so egotistical about what they're trying to achieve here with yoga practice. They will do a posture to the point of injuring themselves. They will try to go more deeply into a posture than they're able to go. They'll go really deeply and then they'll pull a muscle or something, right? Well, there's a yoga principle that comes right in at you, which is ahimsa, do no harm. And you must start with yourself with this. You must start with not hurting yourself. And yoga teaches you that in a very visceral way when you hurt your own body. And you go, oh, well, maybe that's what ahimsa is about. And before I try to apply it to my world, I need to apply it to myself. I need to, you might also say then, I must need to learn to love myself. But I think that that's an interesting way of putting it. Do no harm to yourself first. Just try to practice that. That's hard.
Well, see, I see what you're saying, but I see it a little bit differently, Alice. Take your example of being in a yoga class. I've done this before. She said the teacher is up there. There's so many people in between. You can't really see her, or she's the opposite of you. And I will be in the wrong position. I will have the arm the wrong place or the foot the wrong place, or I will be wrong. And if I look at somebody else who is next to me or in front of me, I say, oh, that's it. And in the same principle, I love that we have role models. And some people aren't equipped to know, take him some, okay, do no harm. Maybe somebody just doesn't get that you don't kill a spider in your house. You capture him and take him outside. But when you see someone else doing it, you say, oh, I could do that. That's not a problem. And so I think even Jesus said, watch me and do what I do. I think we need those role models desperately. And then, not that we are where they are, I'm not where the teacher is, I'm not, but it gives me more of a pathway to travel. So I think having a role model or having someone to follow is huge. Otherwise, we wouldn't have yoga classes, we wouldn't need to have someone teach us how. We would read a book and we'd say, oh, I get it. But most people don't. And so I like to be spoon-fed. That's just me.
Oh, no, I totally agree with what you're saying. And that is the work we do in community. And when a teacher is sharing, they're sharing their guidance. They're doing that with love.
Yeah.
And they're teaching with love, ideally. They're not all. There's some teachers out there that don't teach with love and who foster egotism in their students. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's up to the individual to discern that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's all about discerning, and it's discerning. You're discerning. Am I using this instruction constructively, or am I using it to beat myself up, or am I envious, or the thing is that as you practice these things come up. So you might not realize that you had like an envious bone in your body. You might have thought you had no envious bone in your body, but suddenly something emerges when you're on the yoga mat and you realize, I was feeling kind of envious. I was feeling kind of, I was envying my neighbor. So that's all I'm saying, yes. And of course, not to say that the community is not great for corrective action, but it's the attitude of your ego. Now, if you had looked at the person, you managed to correct your posture by looking at your neighbor, and you came into the right alignment, that's good. But if you had said to yourself, how could I have made such a stupid mistake, and started going on with the monkey mind, beating yourself up, that would have been different. But you used it constructively.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah.
But there's also the side where you can beat yourself up, and go, how can I be such a bad practitioner? You know, that's all I'm saying. I'm using tiny examples because I'm trying to bring it to the granular level of what these might mean, these the Ten Commandments. But most important point is that they are interpreting these things on a very, very different level than the literal. These are not the literal Ten Commandments. And that's why they're going to take a while to absorb what they're trying to say here. And it is not an easy go. You can't just read it and go, oh yeah, totally. I get the correlations they're making. The one that stuck out with me about bearing false witness against thy neighbor, he goes into a big thing about the dangers of criticism and rivalry, and he relates this to the foundations of spiritual and religious foundational structures. So he basically says something. He gives this example. This could be contentious. He talks about Martin Luther, that Martin Luther went in to reform the church, and carried away by his desire to do better, founded a rival church, whilst declaring Rome as the seat of the Antichrist, and that its faithful were either poor strays or wolves in sheep's clothing, which threw into one big basket all the saints, St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa, St. Julian of Avila. And so he's saying that what Martin Luther did was a negative, formed a church based on a negative, on a polemical, critical foundation. And that is an enemy, that creates, that's the mortal enemy of spiritual life, because they signify the substitution of destructive electrical energy for constructive vital force. So what he would say is that not being inspired from above, what Martin Luther did, he would not say Tomberg would assert that what Martin Luther did was polemical and not based on an impulse or inspiration, revelation from above, that it was a negative thing, and therefore created a negative foundation. So that's a pretty blanket criticism of the Protestant church. Okay. The very essence of Protestant, what he would say here is that the essence of protesting is inimical to the spiritual life. Okay. So whether or not you agree with that or not, that's a big statement. That's a big statement. And I think here's where you have to remember that Tomberg has a little bit of the zealotry of a convert. He's a Catholic convert. Okay. And so this is an apology. He's making an apology of a Catholic church here. He's using this as a one of the many times that he uses his thinking to bolster his defenses of the Catholic faith. So we taking that with a grain of salt. Taking that with a grain of salt. What he's trying to say is that he doesn't believe any authentic spirituality can have its origin or existence arise from the spirit of rivalry or criticism. That to be against something is sterile and is never capable of engendering a viable tradition or giving birth to a school of spiritual life, whilst to be for something is fertile and is an indispensable condition for all constructive activity. This includes every tradition or viable school of spirituality. So do you follow that?
I think that's really true and really helpful. But Alice, I would like your wisdom. I don't understand it when he talks about electricity. I mean, I understand a little bit about the physics of electricity, not very much, but just a little. I'm not sure why it is inherently negative, metaphysically, any more than gravity is.
Yeah, I think you have to understand electricity as a man-made construct. It's a construct that's made within the closed circuit of the serpent's power. It's again, it's bios as opposed to zoe.
Mhm.
So it's bios, which can create the illusion of having a life of its own. Uh, and so what he would say is, yes, that's very interesting. What he says about it's electrical. Um, what he's saying to me in this text, that goes back to what Mebes was saying about creating the individual life. When there's an attempt made to do not attempt an individual life on the physical plane, that would apply directly to this. That what he would argue is that Martin Luther was trying to create a religion, the foundation of a religion based on an individual life that could take off on its own on the physical plane, that it could flower. That what he's saying is that would never really flower because it's not inspired by revelation. So this might sound rather strict, but these are the tenets. These are the tenets of the principles of Hermeticism. And you'll hear more and more about electrical life versus Zoe, which is life from the one life. And the Zoe is where the principle of virginity emanates. So getting back to that, there has to be, throughout all these commandments, the integrity of virginity must be observed. And that is what Mebes keeps talking about when he talks about the one life and its manifestations. The same life flowed with its powerful force, both through the mineral, a blade of grass, the smallest specimen of the animal kingdom, as through the human being. So that is what he's saying, that any tradition must be founded on this respect for the virgin life, the virgin impulse from which life emanates. The electrical level can be a false reproduction, but it will never partake of the virgin life. And so I'm sorry to abstract it that way.
Yes, I mean, and I can see how that applies if we are thinking of the electricity that is comes into our house and keeps our fridges and cookers and goodness knows what going. But what about the electricity in our own nervous system, which keeps us going? Does that have this negative association? Because that is not a man-made electricity at all.
No, it's simply if you detach. Okay, so we have electrical systems, and yes, and the universe is electrical. The physics of the universe partakes of electrical fields, magnetic fields, and gravity, all those things.
Hmm.
But what, again, the principle is, if you try to separate electrical energy, which is generated through the field of bios, it's generated on the physical plane. If you try to take electrical life and make it a separate entity, you have detached it from Zoe. Hence, if you clone a life, an example, if you clone a life from stem cells and you create a being which is not ensouled, but is a clone, a copy of a souled being, but it's not ensouled. There's a good example right there. That would be electrical work. That would be electrical in nature and separated and divorced from Zoe. Because Zoe is the force of life that would ensoul. So therefore you cannot through making clones, ever reproduce Zoe. It would be a false reproduction and would move you farther and farther away from the one life. There's just an example.
So the important thing is to think about it the right way and not to confuse it with, God's work, full stop, and how we use it.
I think so. That's how I take it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Does that help?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Yes, because it's really tough because we're talking about physical principles and then metaphysical principles. And how do they align? How do they? And I think sometimes it can be quite clumsy trying to explain the alignments. I've been studying David Wilcock, and he's goes into very deep science, and yet he's also trying to connect it to the metaphysical. And so he was giving a lecture on that everything emanates from one photon, one single photon. This is that the initial, in the beginning was the word. It's that. It's one photon. It's one light particle. The entire universe emanates from that and then collapses back down into itself, back to that, in a breathing cycle, a breathing out and in, expansion, contraction. So okay, so there's one thing. Wrap your head around that. That's wild. That every photon that we see is a reproduction or a holograph of the original photon. All goes back to that, which is again saying the one life source. It's saying the same thing, but in physics. It's trying to say it in quantum, on the quantum level. Everything originates with the original photon. So there's an example where we're trying to map on physics and science and what we understand empirically onto a quantum model. The quantum model takes us into the metaphysical realm automatically. That's what's so interesting, because so scientists now, they have to become mystics and metaphysicians. They have no choice. Quantum reality is driving them there, which is wonderful. But I
remember on television some years ago now, there was a program about infinity, and the presenter, with his tongue in his cheek, said, on the whole, mathematicians are pretty happy people with their lists and their numbers and their calculations. But one thing will really scare them stiff, and that is if they have to deal with infinity, which is not only an uncomfortably large number, but it is something that alters all of the rules, and so you don't know where you are. And he suggested that to keep a mathematician happy, either they have to manage to work hard and have infinity and another infinity on both sides of an occasion, so they can cancel each other out and they can forget about it, or else they have to grab for the bottle of gin. So I mean, it's either gin or mysticism, isn't it?
Exactly. It gets back to that. It gets back to that, doesn't it? And indeed, that's what David Wilcock was saying. He was saying, deal with it. There's infinity on both ends.
Yeah.
There's infinity on as far as you can explore outward, and there's infinity as far as you can explore inward. And that's just the state of it. And if you can accept that, it's beyond. It's just beyond understanding. And you start there. So maybe if you start there, you can then open up to other possibilities, as long as you don't have to calculate it quantitatively. And David Wilcock goes into great detail. Whenever he's going into great detail, quantitatively trying to prove one of his theorems, I glaze over, I'm like, oh God, get to it. And eventually he brings it back around to a metaphysical principle, but he's trying to prove a metaphysical principle through scientific theories. He's determined. This is one of his particular missions in life, is to show how the physical maps onto the metaphysical. It's that it's completely consonant and makes complete sense. But boy, that's a tall order. And it's hours and hours and hours of lectures that I have to listen. I'm listening to him. Some of it sifts in eventually, though. Some of it does sift in. I'm absolutely fascinated. The Mebes book. I get mystified when I'm reading the Mebes, because this goes in so deeply into the Kabbalah, the Sephiroth, and the Tree of Life, and all of the explanations, and it goes deeply into the Hebrew letters, their interpretations. Inevitably, it gets into numbers. Inevitably, it gets into all sorts of very densely packed symbols. And I just go, whoa! Anytime you, it's really hard to juggle going deeply into something, and then understanding the symbolism, absorbing it on that level, which is more intuitive, and then pulling back and saying, okay, what did I get out of that? What can I actually apply? And sometimes I think you just have to have faith that some of it sifts in on some level, And if you start glazing over on a page and it's not computing, just accept that you've reached some sort of threshold. Just accept that I remember when I first studied the Yoga Sutras, getting back to yoga again, I read all the Yoga Sutras. I just sat down and read them all. They're very short aphorisms. I read them without commentary. I just wanted to read the actual teachings. And I remember reading and getting to, okay, I can follow. Yeah, I totally. Oh, totally. I get that. I got to some number. There was like 128 of them or something. And I got to like a number, I don't know, 113. And I was like going, I'm reading this over and over again, and I'm not understanding it at all. Doesn't matter how many times I read it, I'm not going to understand it. But then I just decided, well, that's where I am on the path. Let me backtrack and let me go back to the parts that I think I begin to understand, maybe. And then I'll just work with those and I'll practice those. And eventually, as you practice them, the other ones begin to unfold their meaning to you. And that's a good example to me about Tomberg and the principle of electricity, how he uses it. It's a tough one. It's a tough one to get your head around, especially in light of our modern world and all of the understanding we have on the quantum level about what electricity is. But you have to understand, I think, how he's using electrical force, what it means. So I hope this is helpful. It's like I said, this is these are things that we'll see repeated. All of these principles that he's talking about in these 10 commandments, he will keep unpacking them. This letter is incredibly important because he does always do these sort of summations up to the point where we are. And if you just sit there and try to correlate it with the literal, that's where you just have to open up and say, it's not literal. I need to understand, what does electrical force mean on the level of metaphorical? And then once you understand electrical force in the metaphorical sense, then you have to then you might be able to take it to the anagogical sense, which will then be yet another level, symbolic level of electrical force. Do you follow me? I mean, that's what we're trying to do. So I would say that we're very used to, with the 10 commandments, we're quite accustomed to the literal and the moral levels. we've got to the literal and the moral levels, but to take it to the next level, the metaphorical and the anagogical, that's what Hermeticism is encouraging us to try to do.
And sacred analogy, or whatever you call it, is one of the most irritating things I find in the world, because it is so easy to misuse it, and you can think up some rather superficial resemblance between something and something else. And you say, oh yes, this is sacred analogy. No, it isn't, it's just me being an idiot. But having said that, it's not always easy to recognize authentic sacred analogy.
That's right. And we have to read Tomberg with a critical eye, realizing sometimes, wow, what are you doing? That seems like a real stretch there, Valentin.
Yes.
That seems like a stretch. You need to read this critically.
I wish that Dory had been here today, because when Tomberg was talking about, you shall not kill, he interpreted that in having a constructive attitude about everything. And can you imagine in a court of law? Yes, I did kill this person, but it was all right because he really pissed me off, and now I can be so much more constructive about my life.
We just read for our book club, we haven't had the review yet, but Leadership in Turbulent Times by Doris Kearns Goodwin. It takes 4 presidents, Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and Johnson. Now, the writer, Doris Goodwin, was all her adult life, she was in the political scene, a very active political person. She wasn't, I don't know if y'all know her, she wasn't active as far as herself wanting to have a position like president, but she worked with and for Johnson. And to me, history, if it's an autobiography, it's still the person who is writing, it's their perspective of the world, and their perspective, and their ego is very much in there too, of course, especially politicians. But what you're saying, John, is similar to what I felt when I read that book, because Doris Kearns Goodwin did a lot of research. Granted, she did, but it was still, what she read was her perspective. And this is Tomberg's perspective of what he has learned over his lifetime. And he's gone to the right, he's gone to the left, he's gone to the middle, he's gone to the left, he's gone to the right, just like all of us do. But when we take, this is my opinion, when we take something written as the ultimate truth, shame on us. Because that's just that person's perspective. And what I'm hearing John and you, Alice, say is that, yes, it is in that gray area. And yes, it's not literal. But when you start getting away from the literal and the black and white, then that's not always correct either. We have to look at it with what we bring to the table, rather than just, this is what it says and this is correct. So I think history, I'm not a real big history buff because I wasn't there. I didn't see it with my eyes, whether it was the Revolutionary War, whether it was the Great War of World War I, whether it was the kings and princesses and all this. That's somebody else's perspective. And, when I went to Scotland last couple of years ago, here's all of these full, bigger than life portraits of all of these people that they love and respect and adore. And I'm thinking, then you read about how terrible they were, how many people they killed. They killed their brother, they killed their mother. Wow, these are not really good people, but yet they did this, and so they're great. And I'm thinking, it's just, thank goodness we've got a mind, and we can look at things the way that we see them. And just like you said, that the guy who joined us said, oh, good, y'all all love and respect each other. Well, we have to love and respect every human and every sentient being on earth, because they've got a purpose and they've got a mind. Whether it's just a little bitty ant, they've got a drive, and they know what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it. And we have to respect that. That's my opinion.
Well,
So
I
there.
think you obviously understand the essence of what they're trying to get across here with the respect and love of the one life, which is, that's just all. We have to keep that. And we have to keep coming back to the higher law of love. And as long as we keep doing that, we stay grounded. And look, I mean, as long as we do that, we stay grounded, we stay philosophically grounded. And we know that that's working because we keep the group working on the foundation of respect and love. Then it keeps evolving and moving forward. The moment it becomes polemical and critical or polarized in what Charlotte would call the false binaries, the moment that happens, that's when trouble starts. And people go to their separate corners and start to, harden or crystallize or harden their points of view. Creative cross-pollination happens when there is this spirit of trust, and it's not something that you can get through. You can't do it in a quick way. It has to be built. This group's been building it over time, so we're beginning to see the fruits of that. It's very exciting. But he talks about the example of, you cannot, one way of trying to steal would be to try to gain transcendental experience by doing peyote or drugs, or, I know people who say they do that, they go this path. They're trying to take a shortcut to get spiritual enlightenment without any effort or sacrifice on their own part. They're trying to take a shortcut to enlightenment, we call it. You can't do that. That's simply what these laws are stating. That's part of the things that these laws are saying. You cannot do that. That is called stealing. That's the principle of stealing. Do you understand? So we have to understand how to plug in the principles. Stealing is not just stealing your neighbor's bread, okay? Stealing could be this: trying to steal a transcendent experience, which is trying to short circuit the one life by taking a shortcut to wisdom. And you can't do that. You have to do the work. You have to work with sacrifice and effort, concentrated effort, lengthy effort. So again, I didn't mean to go off on the tangent again, but that is one point I did want to unpack that one. Because again, it's repetition. I think this is going to help us to try to understand, tease out what these principles mean. Vance, my cat, stop screaming, please. Have patience. I will let you out in a minute. So anyway, how do we feel? Should we wrap this up today? I think we made some great headway. And I so appreciate that you guys came and made time for this, because we don't necessarily, that itself was a great discipline. And I just really appreciate you coming and making this space and time to do this.
It's a difficult time of year, though, isn't it?
What'd you say, John?
A difficult time of year.
It is. I'm glad we decided to take a break, though, and not make anything required. because people can, and we can have these things and put them up on my website, which is wonderful, and people can go and taste them if they want to. Honey, what were you saying? You said
We are so glad to see that you look wonderful. You sound like you are doing all the right things and you've got all the right equipment. So I'm very, very, very happy for you.
Yes.
thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now, and thank you all for being here today.